Phyllis McCoy, alcoholic. Thank Bobby and the committee for inviting me. A lot of work to do here. I appreciate it. I'm here to share my experience, strength, and hope with you. My sobriety date is June the 26th, 1976. For that, I'm very grateful. It's certainly by the grace of God and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that I have found a power greater than myself who solves my problems. It's been quite a journey. 49 years is a long time without a drink. And the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous is I haven't wanted one for a long, long time. And that's because it works. I grew up in a small, I want to introduce my family. My whole family's here. Stand up, the whole row. Thank you for your support. And Cindy is here with her husband, Tim. I've sponsored Cindy for about a year and a half, and we just met. Thank you. Thank you. I grew up in a small town on a farm, and my father and mother were hard-working people. Mother was stay-at-home, and Dad was an oil field worker and a farmer. And on the farm, you have all kinds of chores, and we did. And I didn't like it, but I did it. Had to. At 14, I got a work permit and went to Bartisville every summer and worked. And when I was 17, I was down there working, and I met Mr. Wright. And he was in the service, and we dated and got married against my father's wishes. And then they shipped him off to Germany. And I went to my father, and I said, I want to go to Germany. And he said, that's not a good idea. And I said, well, I went to a travel agency, and I have all these plans. If you'll loan me the money, I'll pay you back. Well, he did. So off I went on the SS United States, old ship. It was a luxury liner. It took 5.5 days to get there, and it was a real good experience. In Germany, we didn't have the money to drink that good German beer. And we didn't do a lot of sightseeing because we were paying my father back. Fast forward, and I was married at 17. Gail, my daughter, was born at 19, when I was 19. And we hadn't gone to church. I'd gone a few times with my grandmother, but I just knew there was a creator because she was so perfect. And everything was good. Life was good. And then when she was 3 years old, my husband wanted a divorce. And my whole world fell apart. I was devastated, heartbroken. And I went to Tulsa and started going to John's Business College and took accounting and got a job. I just existed. And he came over and he said, well, she had a daughter the same age of Gail. And he said, why don't you let us keep Gail, and you won't have to pay a babysitter, and you need to go out and do something and meet some people. Well, one night I thought that was a good idea, and I walked into this loud, noisy neighborhood bar, and I started drinking. It was just like magic. It changed the way I felt. It changed the way I thought, but more importantly, it took away the pain. And I had a great time. And I closed the bar. And I was very sick. Oh, I was sick. But you know what? I remembered the next morning. What a good time I'd had. I was part of life at last, just like Bear W. So I climbed on that merry-go-round of alcoholism, and I ran around with a crowd that was busy, worked hard, played hard, drank hard. I eventually married one of these men, and We didn't change a thing. One night we were in a bar, and there was another couple sitting at the table with us. And he and I got in a disagreement. And he got up and left, and I said, I don't know where my car was, but I said, you know, if I had some wheels, I would leave that guy. And this guy said, do you have $100? And I said, no, but I can get 100. Why? He said, let's go get you a car. I thought that was a great idea. It was a bad idea. So we go out of state. We go in this great big parking lot, and lots of cars. And he switches a tag in one and wires it up, and I get in it, and back to Tulsa we go. And we stop along the road, and she gets in the car with me to talk and, you know, keep me awake, and it was mist and raining. Actually, it was freezing, but I didn't know that. And I go across this bridge, and the car started fishtailing, and I started fighting with the wheel. I got it straightened up, but I was on the wrong side of the road, and I ran head-on into this pickup. And when I came to, the highway patrol was there. They took us all to the hospital, but I felt over there, and she wasn't in the car with me, and I thought, oh, I've killed all these people. Well, we all survived, but we were pretty well banged up. And my mother came the next morning, and I told her what I'd done. She couldn't believe it. Well, neither could I. Doing something I shouldn't have done. They never found out about that car because during the night, my husband had this car towed away. And he didn't bother to tell me. I don't think I would have told my mother. But they never found out about it. And so he'd had all of me he could stand. He sent me home to the farm. Now, I forgot to tell you, I was the only child for 6 years. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and I was spoiled rotten. And when the siblings started coming along, I didn't resent them, but I resented the heck out of my mother. And that resentment grew and grew and grew as I grew up. We never did get along. We had a love-hate relationship, and it was my fault. I mean, I was a brat. I know that today. Selfish and self-centered. I wasn't enough, see? And I took it out on her. I didn't know that until I got to you people. But anyway, when I would drink, I didn't ever bother to go home on weekends anymore after I came back to Tulsa. I talked him into coming after me and bringing me back to Tulsa. And we even bought a home and tried to make it, but it just did not work. So one night I walked into a bar, and down at the end of the bar was this guy like this on the bar. Someone introduced me, and it was Joe. And I said, gee, Joe, you look like my 3rd husband. He said, how many have you had? And I said, 2. Well, he stayed plumb away from me. I'd have to make him speak to me. And one night I was closing the bar, and I went out, and he was passed out in his car. And I knocked on the window, and I said, Joe, I'll get someone to follow me, and I'll drive you home. You know, if they have what you want, you go to any length to get it. And I did. But then he had to speak to me, and we started dating and eventually got married in 1967. And didn't change a thing. Drank every day. My daughter now is 11, and she decided she wanted to come and live with us. And I was so excited. I said, Joe, we've been drinking way too much. And he said, yes, we have. He said, I tell you what, I'll buy a cabin on Grand Lake, and every weekend we can go up there and we can be a family and do boat rides. Sounded great. I'd go to the liquor store on Friday, load up, go home, mix us up a jug of ice water. We'd pass that bottle back and forth with our ice water and take she and her friend to the lake with us every weekend. That's the way we raised her. Didn't change a thing. Well, she couldn't wait to get away from us. She graduated when she was 16 and got married when she was 17, and that was it. And I think she married the first guy she dated just to get away from us. But he was a very nice young man. Anyway, we're drinking and we can't get along, and it's his fault. It is all his fault. So we decided to split up Tulsa. We lived on 45th Place, and he took 41st North and West, and I took 41st South and East. Well, occasionally we would run into each other when there was other people involved. And then eventually we were divorced in 1973, June 73. In November, Joe calls me and he said, Phyllis, I have been going to AA and I have found that I'm an alcoholic. And could I come over and have a cup of coffee? Well, he came over and I opened the door and there he stood, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He came in and he was so nice and so different. And he did that a couple of times. Then he said, you know, my sponsor and I and a couple of women from AA are going to a conference in Shreveport, Louisiana. Would you like to go? Well, heck, I didn't want to go to no conference. But I heard myself say yes, that I would go. That night going through the lobby, there was a bar over there with all the lights and the booze, and I thought, oh gosh, I need a drink, but they're not drinking and I won't either. We walked in this meeting, and I heard this lady speak for the very first time. Her name was Marion M., and she was from Florida, and I've never ever heard of her since. But she started telling her story, and I started identifying. And I started crying. Well, you couldn't make me cry. I'd become so cold and so hard-hearted. She made me cry. I was so embarrassed. And going back home, Joe's sponsor said, Phyllis, I go to Al-Anon. I'd like to invite you sometime to go. We meet for an hour. And I said, okay, I'll go. And so I would go to the Al-Anon meeting for an hour, and then I would go to my bar. I didn't learn a lot, you know. And then one time she said to me, Phyllis, did it ever occur to you that you might be in the wrong program? I was offended. I thought, what does she know about drinking? She doesn't drink. Anyway, I quit going. I didn't go back. And I agreed when we went back together in June of 74. And I had agreed to quit my job and to stay out of the bars. I was a bar drinker. I liked the bars. And so I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. And, you know, I start drinking again. And Joe said, what is wrong with you? I said, it's because I'm not working. So he said, I tell you what, the kids need something to do. He said, I'm going to buy this Coney Island, and you can just go get the money. And Jim and him can run the Coney Island. Good. Sounds like a good deal. Well, he didn't like the Coney Island business, and guess what? That meant I had to go out there and go to work. Another big resentment. And Joe would come by in the evening. He was in the printing business, and he'd come by in the evening and work with us during the dinner hour. And then he'd go to a meeting every night. Every night. And I was resentful about that. Well, you know what I did? I'd lock the door and start drinking. And I don't know how long. Sometimes, you know, I knew I I was losing control, but it was one more attempt and one more failure. And I knew he was getting tired of it, and I would lie and all that stuff. But we decided to sell the business, and we had gone to a conference in Shreveport, Louisiana, and Alabama Carruthers was there. And after she spoke, I asked her if I could talk to her, and I told her about my drinking. And she said, Phyllis, a normal drinker never entertains the idea that they might be an alcoholic. You either are or you aren't. She said, that's like being a little bit pregnant. You are or you aren't. And she said, alcoholism is like an elevator. You can take it all the way to the bottom, or you can get off on any floor. And I didn't like that either. I continued what I was doing. And he went to a group on Friday night that had an open meeting, and I'd always gone with him. Now, I knew I was an alcoholic, but I wasn't that bad. And this time it's going to be different. You know how the mind lies to you? And but one night they were giving away Desire chips. And I walked up there and got that Desire chip. It was just like I was watching someone go up there and get that Desire chip. And then I thought, what have I done? I couldn't imagine life without alcohol or with it the way it was. What have I done? And at that time, this group had these little phrase classes, step 1, 2, 3. And I'd go in those, and I hated to be there. I hated to be in there. But I would go, and I would go to a meeting in the morning or noon, and then we went to a meeting every night. And I thought I was doing the deal. I wasn't drinking. I was going to meetings. Now, I wanted to drink every day, but I didn't. I just put it off. And then we were building a home, and I was going to the furniture store, and it was closed. So I thought, well, I miss my old friends at the bar. I think I'll go by and say hello. No thought of drinking, none. And I walked in to my neighborhood bar, and she set me up a drink. And I looked at that, and I had no defense against that drink. And I closed the bar. And I went home, and of course Joe was asleep, thank goodness. The next morning, I told him what I'd done. He said, I'm not surprised at all. You can sit in a chicken house from now on, and it won't make you a chicken. And he said, you haven't done anything but take up a chair. You haven't got a sponsor. You haven't worked the steps. And we can't stay sober without guidance and help. No human power can relieve our alcoholism. And you know, even though I knew I was an alcoholic, I had not conceded to my innermost self. And then when he told me all of that, and I knew what he was saying was true, I conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic, and I would do whatever they told me to do. Now, Joe had been involved in service, and I'd always sit in the back seat and listen to him and his service sponsor. And so when I needed a sponsor, I went to her and asked her if she'd be my sponsor. And she said, yes, we'll get to work on the steps. And she said, I want you to go in every morning and read this little 24-hour book, and I want you to ask God to help keep you sober that day. And I said, I don't like this God bit. She said, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. I just want you to do it. And I did. And one day, I did not think about a drink. And then I knew there's something here that's working. And I wanted whatever it was. I wanted that. I did not want to drink. So we started on the steps, and we did the third step prayer, and it's one of my favorite prayers. I still do it every morning today. But then we did our fourth step. But before I get into that, I'll go back to Joe. And when I was 1 year sober, he went to Shangri-La, and he heard a guy, Joe McQuaney, do a film, Disease or Disgrace. And he said, my gosh, I've been treating this as a moral issue. It's a disease. You see, we had never heard of the doctor's opinion. When we went into the group, someone had taken a paragraph out of the big book and put it on an index card. And you would pick up an index card and you'd go around the room and read it and comment. That was our big book study. We had never, ever heard the doctor's opinion. Anyway, after he heard that, he went back to the group and he said, what is this? He asked the chairman, what is this about a disease? And the chairman said, oh, hell, Joe, don't worry about that. Worry about staying sober. Of course, we knew later he didn't know about it either. He didn't know either. And we got acquainted with Joe and Charlie. And they'd come down and they were doing reading the big book in hotel rooms. And we'd sit around the hotel room and listen to them spoon feed us the big book. And we'd invite him down to speak. And Joe McQuaney would bring his barbecue rub, and we'd fix ribs. And we just loved Joe and Charlie. And we decided that the big book was the answer for us. So we started the original West Side group in Tulsa in 1978. And that's the member I'm of today still. We do that. We had a 2-hour meeting. The first hour was doctor's opinion. The second hour was there is a solution. And we just grew by leaps and bounds. We had asked before we did that, we had asked the group if we could play these 4 little cassette tapes that Joe and Charlie had made. And it was 12 to 13, so we got to play them. And they would come from all over town to listen to these little 4 cassettes about the big book. They didn't know about it either. But anyway, then we started the group, and we just grew by leaps and bounds. And I think it's the most wonderful thing that we can tell a newcomer is what's wrong with this. I have a fatal illness, an obsession of the mind. An obsession is an idea that overpowers all other ideas. No matter how much willpower I have, it does not work when you have that obsession. And I have a physical allergy. Once I take that first drink, I want another one, and I want another one. It explains many things for which I could not otherwise account. It explained when I stopped in for a drink or two and I'd close up the bar. I never knew why those normal people got up and went home, and now I do. They drink all they want every time they drink it, and I couldn't drink enough. I really thought I was a bad person, but now I know that I was a very sick person with a fatal illness. But I believe that if we gave our book to a cancer patient and it had the answer for cancer, they would love it. And what do we alcoholics do? I'm not that bad. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do all those steps. And so the price is usually they go out there and do the best they can do, which usually isn't good enough. We had a young man in our group the other day, very new, and he couldn't get a hold of it, so he did the ultimate sacrifice. He took his life. So I know how serious it is. I went back, got my sponsor, and I did the 4th step. The first time it was probably guilt, shame, and remorse. But the second time it was by the columns, by the book. And I found out how much resentment I had in my life and how I blamed other people. I found out that I had 3 basic instincts for security, social, and sex. And any time one of those are threatened or interfered with, I react. I found that out in my inventory. I had no idea. I found out that I was full of character defects, that it was me, it was not you, that I was dishonest, selfish, self-centered, inconsiderate, and full of fear. It introduced me to the real Phyllis, and it wasn't pretty to look at. And I was surprised because it had always been your fault. And now I could see the people I'd hurt by my behavior, and I was willing to make my amends. I looked at those character defects, and of course you can't wish them away. And at that particular inventory, I wanted to completely be different. And I was willing to do that 6 and humbly ask him in 7 to remove them. And it says in the 12 and 12, in the day we ask. That means I have to ask every day, and I don't always do that. But I should. I had my list of people I'd harmed, and my family came first. I went to Joe, and we talked about all of our past and how we'd been sick people, and sick people do sick things. And we were on a different path today, a spiritual path. And we had God in our life to guide us and sponsor, and we could live a different way. I went to my mother. No, I went to my daughter first, and I told Gail I was sorry I had not been a mother and had not been there for her all those years. She said, I don't want to talk about it, Mom. And then I went to my mother, and I told her how sorry I was that I'd been such a brat and that I'd never understood what she was going through. It'd always been about me. And that I hadn't gone home on weekends when I was drinking because I stayed in the bars. And then I went to my sponsor and I said, you know, I didn't feel any different after going to my mother. And she said, well, sometimes if you have a deep-seated resentment, a long-term one, you have to do a lot of work to get rid of it. So she said, here's what I want you to do. Mother lived in Kansas. I want you to call your mother every Sunday. I want you to send her cards, and I want you to take her on trips. And I thought, oh my God, what an order. But I did that, and I don't know if it was 1 year or 2 years. We were in Eureka Springs getting ready for bed one night. And I heard my mother for the first time ever. Not as I believed she was, and not as I had judged her, but as she really was. A very strong, good mother. How I had misjudged her. And that's what a resentment is. Wrong judging and wrong believing. You see, I believed those things, and they weren't true at all. So from that day on, we had a great relationship. We went lots of places, did lots of things. She loved Joe, Joe loved her. It was a good, and if I hadn't done those things that I did not want to do, I would have missed that. I know that. I consider myself fortunate to have had those years together. I remembered the car. I did not know who I got the car from. had no idea. And there was a guy Joe went to meetings with named Woody that they took meetings into a halfway house. And he was very helpful in helping drunks. So I had a good allowance, and I would send Woody money every 2 weeks to help pay for that car. That was my paying for the car. I had been sued, and I couldn't I couldn't tell him what I'd done, and so that was my way. And when you get pretty thirsty. That's when I really hung it on. But that was my amends for the car. There was other amends. There's been other inventories because I've had character defects. One of them was more. Buy this, buy that, I need this, I need that. And then after you get it, it means nothing. Well, I've learned today, material things are not what it's all about. It's what's inside. It's an inside job. It's helping others. But I had no idea. I had no idea. I was a selfish, self-centered person I was. You know, there's a lot of must in our big book, 57 of them, in the first 164 pages. And you must not take that first drink. You must find a power greater than yourself. You must be rid of the selfishness or self-centeredness, or it kills us. And I believe that with all my heart. I love everything the big book says. Joe and Charlie were very, very helpful to me. They'd set me right real quick. But the way Joe got to be with Joe and Charlie, we were in Burlington, Vermont, and Joe was rotating out as delegate. And I said, "What are you going to do now, Joe?" And he said, "I don't know, but it'll be good." And we got home that Monday night, and Charlie called him, and he said, "Joe McQuaney is going to start taking recovery dynamics into prisons and hospitals. And he can't go out as much, so would you go?" And Joe was thrilled. He was very nervous, but he was thrilled. So in January of 1990, Joe did the first big book, Joe and Charlie. And he did that for the next 16 years. So he was gone a lot. So then I get involved in service. Because he was gone so much, I had lots of time to work with others and get involved in service. So I too went through the service structure, became an area. My sponsor was the first area chair and delegate, and I was the second area chair and delegate. And I didn't realize how big Alcoholics Anonymous was till I had gone to New York and met all these other people from all over. And it's quite an honor and a privilege. But where am I? Got busy working with people. You know, the big book has a chapter working with others, but I wasn't reading that. So I was doing everything wrong. My first lady was pretty needy, and I took her to treatment, and I got her an apartment, and I moved her, and she didn't get sober. We were going to Hot Springs to a conference, Joe and I, and I'd asked her to come over and take care of my little dog, Mitzi, while we were gone. And I had a funny feeling after we'd gone down the road, and I said, "Let's go back and look in the window." And we went back and looked in the window, and there she was. I guess she had not a drinking problem, but at that point, a pill problem, and she was all passed out. So I learned a lot. You have to follow the directions in the book, and I try to do that today. I sponsor women, and I get more out of sponsoring them than they get out of me, I'm sure. But we have a good time. We have a good time. Sobriety is a whole new way of life. I remember thinking when I was new, I'm 39 years old, and I will never, ever have any more fun. And I'm too young for a rocking chair. I really thought that. But I can't tell you of the places I have been, mostly because of Joe and Charlie, and the people I have met that still are very much a part of my life. I got a call from one just before I came in today, and it's so good to know people, not just in your own group, but from all over, and to see new faces and make new friends. It's a fellowship that I would have missed if I hadn't have done what I didn't want to do. I feel like I've left something out, but I don't know what. I say what I'm supposed to say, right? So Joe's busy going with Charlie, and I was probably 9 or 10 years sober, and all of a sudden it came to me, is this all there is? What's wrong? I'm going to meetings, I'm working with other people. Is this all there is? That's the way I felt. I knew what they were going to say to me before I even went to the group, what they were going to say. So I went to my sponsor and I talked to her, and she says, well, sometimes when we pray, it feels like it's just bouncing off the wall. Just keep on praying and keep on working with the girls. Keep on doing what you're doing. Well, it didn't go away. So I went and made an appointment with Charlie. And we sat down at the kitchen table, and I told him what I've told you. And he said, Phyllis, you're not working step 10. And I almost fell out of my chair because I wasn't. You see, it says continue to take inventory. I was taking everybody's inventory. Everybody. Somehow I thought the spiritual axiom says if there's something wrong, there's something wrong with me. So I had kept stuffing everything, stuffing. I didn't talk about what I was thinking or feeling. I just stuffed it. And that's why I was feeling the way I was feeling. So he said, sit down and read that. Continue to take personal inventory, and when wrong, promptly admit it. Maybe you need to talk to someone about it. You might need to make amends. What could you have done differently? And it's a big part of my life today. Now, I will admit that I'm a long way from being perfect. I still have these character defects, and I will have them till the day I die. But I have a tendency to say something before I think. I don't suppose you do that, but I do. And I know better. But thank God for the 11th step prayer. Guess what? Continue to take inventory. Was I selfish, self-centered, dishonest, and inconsiderate today? Did I hurt someone's feelings? Was I loving and kind towards everyone? What could I have done better? Show me what I can do to make amends. Again, looking at Phyllis. Selfish and self-centeredness, I guess, will always be with me. I must be rid of self, and I can't wish it away. I have to ask. I have to do those things. And sometimes I get tired, but what I do, the way I do it, is I get up every morning, I get my coffee, and I go in and do my reading, do my prayer, do my meditation. Sometimes an hour I take. Don't do anything else till I do that. I want to get to God before somebody gets to me. I'm going to finish a little bit early. Gosh. Joe got very, very ill. We went on a cruise in 2006. We went on a lot of cruises. And he had eaten oysters in the half shell in New York and Nova Scotia. And he was so sick. And when we got off the cruise in New York, I took him to the ear doctor because he'd lost his hearing. It was bleeding. He couldn't hear. The ear doctor said, well, he can... I said, he's got the flu, I guess. The ear doctor said, well, he can fly home, but I don't know anything about the flu. Well, we went home, and the next morning he was incoherent. And I got him dressed and set him on a stool, and he fell off of it. Anyway, took him to emergency. And he had meningitis. And he lost his memory. He almost died. He was in the hospital for 7 days. He almost died. But the doctor said, I believe his memory will come back. It may take a while, but it'll come back. Well, he couldn't remember, and he couldn't hear. But we did not miss one meeting. I guess he remembered he was an alcoholic. We didn't miss a meeting. And gradually, the memory started coming back. And I thought it was pretty good, but he never, ever thought it was good enough to do a Joe and Charlie anymore. And so he quit in 2006. And then we just went to conferences. We just was living the life, having a good time. And then in about 2012, I guess, he had bronchitis every year. And we went to the doctor, and he had lung cancer. So he went through all that treatment. And the doctor finally told him he's going to recover. He had it all. And we were so happy. And then in about a year later, we were driving down the road, and his face started twitching real bad. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I don't know. And so we went to the doctor, and it had gone to his mind. And he had cancer of the mind. And he took all the treatments, and he got weak. And so Joe passed away November 23rd in 2014. This year it will be 11 years. And it was really, really, as some of you know, a big adjustment. And I started going to a grief class. I missed my closed meetings for 12 weeks and went to this grief class. And I know I can plug one, but AA can't. But it helped me tremendously. I was with people that were hurting just like I was and that understood what I was going through. And we shared with each other, and just like we do in AA, we share with each other our experience, strength, and hope. It's one of the best things I ever did. And then I got back, and I didn't feel like working with anybody, didn't want to work with anybody, into self, into grief. And this young lady came to our group, and she was drunk. And I gave her my phone number. And some months later, she called me, and she was in Valley Hope, getting ready to get out. And so we made an appointment to meet, and she came to the house, and I started working with Patty. And you know what the book says, when all else fails, work with another alcoholic, and that'll bring you right out of it. And it brought me out of it, out of self again. And we have a great relationship today. She'll have 10 years in April. And then during the pandemic came, you know. And oh God, it was hard on everybody. We had, thank God for those Zoom meetings though. And my daughter and I were in the car one day, and she said, Mom, can you drink a lot and not be an alcoholic? And I said, oh yes, you can. I said, but an alcoholic can't quit, number one. Number two, when they're not drinking, they're thinking about drinking. And that was all that was said. And then it was during the pandemic, she called and said, or came by, I don't know, she said, I can't quit drinking. So I said, that's great news that you can't quit drinking. And I wasn't going to the meeting. I was doing Zoom because of my age, but my group was having a meeting. And so she went down there, and Jim and Jake better the doctor's opinion. So she is sold on the doctor's opinion too, and there is a solution. So she will have 6 years in April. And I'm very, very proud of her and what she does and the program she has. She has a good sponsor in Oklahoma City, and she sponsors women. And, you know, I had never, ever entertained the idea of living with my daughter, ever. And they lived on the lake in Grove, and they decided that they were going to sell their lake property and buy a home in Tulsa or Broken Arrow. And they came down and picked me up, and we went and looked at this house, and they said, "How would you like to live with us?" Well, I hadn't even thought about it. But the more I thought about it, the better it sounded. So last December, I moved in with Jim and Gail in Broken Arrow. And it's been quite different. Like I say, I have a tendency to speak before I think. But I have a program, and she has a program. Now, poor Jim, he just retired, so he has to put up with 2 women. But we get along, and it's been really good. I don't cook, so that's a plus. When you start cooking for one, you lose how to cook anyway, right? So it's been a new adventure, and I'm still learning how to get around Broken Arrow. I love Tulsa. I've lived there all my life. But one day at a time, I'll find my way around, and it'll be good. Life is good today. I don't really have any complaints. As soon as I get my knee fixed, then I can get up and go again, right? I wanted to read this, pardon? I wanted to read my story. It's Joe and Charlie's favorite joke. She likes it. She reminded me. This is about a dog named Sex. Everybody who has a dog calls him Roper or Boy. I call mine Sex. He's a great pal, but he has caused me a great deal of embarrassment. When I went to City Hall to renew his dog license, I told the clerk I would like a license for Sex. He said, I would like one too. Then I said, but this is a dog. He said he didn't care what she looked like. Then I said, you don't understand. I've had sex since I was 7 years old. He winked at me and said, you must have been quite a kid. When I got married, I went on my honeymoon. I took the dog with me. I told the motel clerk that I wanted a room for my wife and me and a special room for Sex. He said, you don't need a special room. As long as you pay your bill, I don't care what you do. I said, look, you don't seem to understand. Sex keeps me awake at night. The clerk said, funny, I had the same problem. One day, I entered Sex in a contest, but before his competition began, the dog ran away. Another contestant asked me why I was just standing there looking so disappointed. I told him I had planned to have sex in the contest. He told me I should have my own tickets. But you don't understand, I said. I had hoped to have sex on TV. He said, now that cable is all over the place. It's no big deal anymore. When my wife and I separated, we went to court to fight for custody of Sex. I said, Your Honor, I've had sex before I was married. The judge said, the courtroom is not a confessional. Stick to the case, please. Then I told him after I was married, sex left me. He said, me too. Last night, sex ran off again. I spent hours looking all over town for him. A cop came over to me and asked, what are you doing in the alley at 4 o'clock in the morning? I said I was still looking for sex. My case comes up Friday. Thank you, and thank you for having me.